Here's the full script. Same cinematic pull, but built around the real question rather than an unconfirmed claim as fact. Somewhere between a locker room in London and a phone that won't stop buzzing, something is happening to a 21-year-old from the Philippines, and nobody, not her fans, not her rivals, not even the reporters chasing the story, can agree on what it actually is. Is it the biggest sponsorship story in the history of women's tennis? Or is it the third fake headline about the same player in less than a year? Somewhere in the space between those two answers sits Alex, and by the end of the next 20 minutes, you're going to understand exactly why that space has become the most talked about mystery in sports. It starts, as these things always seem to now, with a screenshot, no press conference, no official statement, just a claim spreading fast that a Middle Eastern aviation giant, a brand so tied to tennis it practically lives on the sidelines of every Grand Slam, has quietly offered Alex a contract worth millions. And the internet does what the internet does. It combusts. But here's the thing, nobody tells you in the first 30 seconds of a story like this. The loudest headlines are almost never the whole truth, and the quiet detail buried underneath is usually the one that actually matters. So let's rewind, because to understand why anyone would believe this and why so many people immediately didn't, you have to understand who Alex actually is and what she just did on a tennis court that made all of this even possible. Picture center court, grass so green it looks unreal under the lights, a defending champion standing across the net, someone who is supposed to win this match without much trouble at all, and then picture a 21-year-old ranked so far outside the spotlight that half the crowd had to check a program to learn her name, taking that champion apart point by point, 3 sets, absolute precision, until the scoreboard says something that shouldn't be possible. 71 break points forced across the tournament against 27 from her opponents. 21 unforced errors against 44. Those aren't just numbers. That's a player who doesn't blink. And when the final point lands, when she becomes the first Filipino in the modern era to reach the 4th round of a Grand Slam, something shifts. Not just in the rankings, but in the air around her name. She climbs from 32nd in the world to 28th, almost overnight. And that's when the story should have simply been about tennis. It wasn't. Because within days, before the ink on that achievement was even dry, a new claim started circulating. Bigger, shinier, more dramatic than anything about her actual tennis. A deal, millions of dollars. A partnership with one of the most recognizable airline brands on the planet. One that already sponsors every single Grand Slam tournament in existence. And for a moment, it felt like the natural next chapter. Rising star, breakout tournament, blockbuster brand attaches itself to the moment. Clean story. Except it isn't clean at all. And if you've been paying attention, you already know why. Because this is not the first time this exact headline has appeared. Less than a year earlier, a viral claim swept through tennis circles insisting a major racket brand had offered her a $45 million contract. It spread across timelines with the same electricity, the same certainty, the same tone that says this has to be true, look how big the number is. And it was completely fabricated. No contract, no confirmation, nothing but a number that sounded believable enough to travel faster than the truth ever could. Then came a second claim, smaller but just as hollow. The same airline, a $2 million figure. No source, no statement, gone as quickly as it arrived once anyone actually looked for proof. So when this newest, even bigger version shows up, the question isn't just is this true? The question is why does this keep happening to her specifically? And that question is far more unsettling than any dollar figure could ever be. Is it because she's an easy target? Young, suddenly famous, without the decades of media training that older stars have? Is it because a story about a Filipino athlete breaking into elite global endorsement territory is simply too good, too shareable, too emotionally satisfying for people to bother checking if it's real? Or, and this is the part that should genuinely make you uneasy, is there actually something to it this time, buried underneath the noise, and everyone is so busy calling it fake that they might miss the moment it becomes true? Nobody knows yet, and that uncertainty is exactly where this story lives. Let's sit in that uncertainty for a second, because to understand what's actually at stake, you need to understand what her life looked like before any of this noise existed. Born in 2005, she was still a child when she was sent to train at a tennis academy in Mallorca, Spain. One built and shaped by the philosophy of one of the greatest players to ever hold a racket. Discipline before glamour, repetition before recognition. By age 8, while most kids were worried about homework, she had already signed her first endorsement deal with a telecom company back home, becoming one of the youngest brand ambassadors in her country's history. That's not a normal childhood, that's a life engineered, quietly and relentlessly, toward a single outcome. And even then, nobody was promising her anything close to guaranteed. She kept climbing anyway. She became the first Filipino player to win a Grand Slam junior title, a milestone that should have made her a household name overnight, and in some corners, it did. But junior success doesn't always translate. Plenty of junior champions disappear into the pro circuit without a trace, buried under injuries, pressure, or simply the brutal gap between being the best 17-year-old in the world and being competitive against adults who have spent a decade sharpening themselves against real stakes. So when she reached the semifinals of a WTA 1000 event in Miami in March of 2025, ranked 140th in the world, that wasn't just a good result. That was a signal, a quiet warning to the rest of the tour that something was building, and still, almost nobody outside tennis circles noticed. It took Wimbledon, it took that one stunning run through players who had already lifted Grand Slam trophies to drag her into the global spotlight, where rumors like this Emirates story could even take root. Which brings us back to the deal, the one nobody can confirm, the one that either is or isn't happening right now while you're listening to this. Insiders, always insiders, never names, claim the airline has been quietly watching her rise for over a year, waiting for the right moment, and that Wimbledon was the trigger that finally pushed negotiations toward completion. If real, the numbers being whispered would not just increase her income, they would multiply it several times over, vaulting her past most of her peers in endorsement value overnight. Her existing partnerships, a sportswear brand, a racket company, a telecom giant, a bank, a beverage brand, already generate a respectable stream of income for a rising player. But this new deal, if it exists, would not sit alongside those partnerships. It would tower over them, and that's precisely why so many people want it to be true so badly that they're willing to overlook how many times this exact kind of claim has collapsed before. Here's where the story gets uncomfortable though, because it isn't just about whether a contract exists. It's about what happens to a 21-year-old when the entire internet decides, rightly or wrongly, that she's suddenly one of the most valuable athletes in her sport. The scrutiny doesn't wait for confirmation. It's already here. Every practice session gets photographed. Every offhand comment gets dissected. Every early exit from a smaller tournament, now, and there will be some because no career moves in a straight line upward, will now be measured against a number that may not even be real. That's the trap hiding inside viral good news. It doesn't just create excitement, it creates a debt that has to be repaid in results, whether or not the original claim was ever true. And she has to walk into her next tournaments carrying that weight regardless of what Emirates does or doesn't announce. So where does that leave things right now in this exact moment? It leaves us with a split reaction rippling across the tennis world. One half thrilled, celebrating what feels like overdue recognition for a player who just made history, arguing that her marketability, her story, her growing fan base across Asia, and the enormous Filipino diaspora scattered through the Middle East, Europe, and North America make her an obvious target for a brand like this. And the other half standing back, arms crossed, pointing out the obvious hole in the story. She hasn't won a WTA title yet. She hasn't reached a Grand Slam final. Companies do not typically hand out career-altering sponsorships to players who are still, technically, on the way up rather than already arrived. That gap between potential and proof is exactly where skepticism breeds, and exactly where the previous two hoaxes about her found their oxygen. So which version of this story is the real one? Maybe neither, maybe both, slightly. Maybe there are quiet conversations happening between her team and Emirates representatives right now. Nothing signed, nothing guaranteed, just the early groundwork of a deal that could take months to actually materialize, which would explain both why the rumor feels plausible and why there's still no official confirmation anywhere. That's the frustrating, addictive nature of stories like this. They don't resolve cleanly. They sit in a gray zone, daring you to keep watching for the moment they either collapse or come true. And there's a bigger picture unfolding underneath all of this noise, one that matters regardless of whether this specific deal is real. For years, women's tennis has fought an uphill battle against a simple, frustrating pattern. Elite female athletes consistently earning a fraction of what their male counterparts collect in endorsements, even when their achievements are just as extraordinary. That pattern has been shifting slowly as brands wake up to something obvious in hindsight. Audiences don't just want winners, they want stories, and few stories hit harder than a young athlete from a country of over 110 million people who have never had a tennis star reach this level before. Whether or not Emirates ever puts a signature on a contract, the appetite for a story like Alex's, the hunger from sponsors to attach themselves to it is entirely real. That hunger is what makes this specific rumor so believable, and also exactly what makes it so easy to fabricate, which leads to the uncomfortable truth sitting at the center of everything you've just heard. This story might be about to become one of the biggest sponsorship moments in the history history of Asian tennis. Or it might be the third fake headline about the same young woman in under 12 months, created by people who understand that a compelling narrative travels faster than any fact check ever could. And right now, genuinely, as this video reaches you, nobody outside a small circle of negotiators knows which one it is. What we do know, what's completely undeniable regardless of what Emirates decides, is that a 21-year-old who was once a name only serious tennis fans recognized just beat a defending Grand Slam champion in straight sets on the biggest stage in the sport and climbed into the top 30 in the world doing it. That part isn't a rumor. That part isn't a viral screenshot with no source. That happened in front of thousands of witnesses and cameras from every corner of the globe. Everything else, the millions, the private jets, the campaigns, the headlines, that's still hanging in the air, unresolved, waiting for either a press release or another quiet correction to settle it one way or another. And maybe that's the real twist buried in all of this. We came into this story chasing a number, a contract, a deal that may or may not exist, but the thing that actually deserves the spotlight was never the rumor at all. It was the 21-year-old who did something no one from her country had ever done on a court where doubt should have swallowed her whole and didn't. Whether Emirates ever confirms a single word of this, whether the deal turns out to be real, or the third fabrication in a pattern that keeps repeating, one thing has already been decided, permanently, unable to be walked back by anyone. Alex made history. The rest for now is still just noise waiting to become truth, or waiting to quietly disappear the way it has twice before.